Welcome back to Fair's Fair, where multitasking has led to me getting nothing done instead of lots of things done. Who'da thunk it? In this vid, we will be examining what is a valid criticism of a story versus a nitpick, something I see obfuscated online quite often, which is understandable because it has a notable gray area. The amount of influence on a plot, or total lack thereof, as well as the intent of the event versus what happens, will change the impact of the problem in question, as well as questions about the technical proficiency in the movie's production. First is the intent. Now, we really can't be sure what the makers intended in the sense of implied meaning, so when I say intent, I mean what was clearly supposed to happen, as opposed to what did. In the case of the Luke Skywalker force kick, his foot was clearly supposed to connect with a face. The intent was almost certainly that he kicked that man in the head. I don't think George Lucas intended that to be a force push projected from Luke's toes, even if George Lucas has made poor decisions before. Fucking kill me! I will start an OnlyFans in exchange for a DVD copy of the pre-edit original trilogy. The point is that unintentional flaws are problems that were scripted different than what ended up on the screen. This does not include things that were supposed to be in the media, but was cut out of it. Cutting something out is a choice, and expecting me to judge a piece of media by things that aren't in it is ridiculous. We also can't count things that contradict the narrative that were added in post as nitpicks. While anyone can claim that the bloody space jizz was supposed to cover the whole sky of Exegol, we can't be certain that's true, and that's far too big a difference for us to ignore. It becomes incredibly hard to believe that something was CGI'd in that wasn't supposed to be there, given the sheer amount of people and time it takes in order to CGI something in. I've had my fair share of mistakes in my life, but I've never tripped so catastrophically that I accidentally spent 2,000 man-hours animating a Hulk dog's balls. If it's made out of CGI, it sure as fuck better have been done on purpose. But mistakes in choreography on the actor's part are generally not an issue. Poor choreography overall is an issue, as the intent was for it to be that way. Mr. Whipsword was pulling a lightsaber towards his face! Not one person in the development of that scene pointed out how stupid any of that was. Even more important than the intent, however, is its impact on the story. For this point, we'll visualize this with a scenario. Let's say there's a fight between two characters. During this fight, a vase in the background is broken. Then, in the next scene, it's not anymore. Now, if this doesn't get brought up, then it's just a continuity error. Complaining about it is a bit nitpicky, but if they later sell the expensive vase in order to finance a crucial turnaround in the plot, it has been upgraded from minor continuity error to major plot hole. Now, you may be wondering, why does this change the importance of a broken vase so much if the casual viewer might not even notice on the first viewing? Well, that's the key. The first time. The second time and beyond, you become more and more likely to see that the entire plot hinges on the impossible. Call me crazy, but I think the quality of a really good story can be, in part, measured by how it holds up to subsequent viewings. If you find more things and details of good writing, then that's great. If you find some ups and some downs, that's okay as well. But if upon closer look the plot is full of holes that get wider and more appear, then it's probably a really bad movie. This vase may have been something that you didn't take note of on the first viewing, but the director making the film absolutely should have known how important it was. The maker should know the twists and developments ahead of time. They should know what will and will not be important later. This is not only a hole in the story, but might also imply that they didn't even think their own story through before making it, or even just didn't care. This is compounded if you're building on something that already was. J.J. Abrams should have known that the old helmet was out of reach, on the floor of an elevator in a ship that blew up. Then in his own movie, Kylo lost his blaster between cuts. The blatant disregard for the past, in even small things, is everywhere. The helmet was supposedly important to the twisted metal wreckage that was supposed to be Kylo's arc. The blaster would have been a valid weapon to use against the Knights of Ren, but instead was erased from existence just so they could further establish that Ren and Rey can just teleport teleport things between them at will. These things add up to make encounters and characters' arcs unimportant, tensionless, because reality itself will change to provide or remove items as needed for events to happen. Though it's not just contradictions. Your story could depend on ridiculously stupid decisions that are unbelievable from anyone with the mental capacity to dress themselves in the morning. The bad guys in High Guardian Spice felt the need to kill anyone who knew about the rot, completely ignoring that a whole species was forced from their homeland by it. How could this not be known by people? They also insist that they need to be low profile, then actively inform the heroes where they are based and who their leaders are. Then the heroes tell no one because the enemies might have spies? But the enemy knows that you know, and they want you dead. Telling more people could only help. These are valid criticisms as they do affect the plot, or even has the plot hinge on them. Now those were about contradictions, but if you're looking for a nitpick, then there's also parts that were not explained that don't have to do with the plot. How does a lightsaber work, for instance? It can't be a laser, and plasma doesn't make a huge amount of sense either from a physics standpoint. This is an okay question, but the parameters of a lightsaber were established, so the actual tech involved doesn't matter. How strong are the engines in that ship from Rogue One? Strong enough to push a large ship in near zero gravity. Little more than that is needed. How does hyperspace work? Well, that wasn't relevant until now. Before, you had to plot a course so that you wouldn't die in transit. It was reasonable to believe you couldn't just smash into something at hyperspeed. But with the established canon that you can light speed ram with a ship, the technicalities of hyperspace are now crucial. How does time travel work in the Tomorrow War? It's reasonable to assume you can't just stop the future, because no one tries. But then the time machine breaks and they're sad that they can't get the magical fix to the future from the past. Just wait! It's the future! Travel forward in time the slow way was always possible. Inevitable even. But then they saved the day by preventing the problem in the first place. If that was always an option and paradoxes aren't a thing, then why was that not the first thing that they tried? What was a nitpick floating in the suspension of disbelief has become a gaping hole in the central premise of the film. Same question, different impact. A nitpick is typically something that doesn't actually affect the plot, like how something with a brand on it magically turns to face the camera, making it clear that they sponsored part of the movie. It's a little strange in Code Geass that the only place that anyone ever seems to eat is Pizza Hut. Now obviously it's because they helped sponsor the anime, but the fact that Pizza Hut seems to be the only restaurant in existence in their world is not really important to anything. You can complain about it and say it's stupid, but it is a nitpick. It doesn't actually affect anything. Moving away from the plot, there's also the technical aspect of making something. This isn't super important for written works. The concept of how to make a book is something that would be hard to fuck up mechanically at this point in civilization. Though if you managed to, tell me in the comments how you did it. I'm curious. Books are relatively simple inventions, you see. But when it comes to movies, there's a buttload of things that can be fucked up in the physical aspect of construction. If the lighting is provided via antimatter reaction that blows out all your pixels, then a reshoot is in order. The audio not lining up, poor balance, seeing the whole production crew in a reflection, storyboards visible through animation layers, poorly layered objects. All these things are mistakes in the production. Production mistakes occupy a weird place in a parallel dimension, where they matter more depending on date, movie theme, and production budget. Old movies couldn't make the kind of fly-through on Pandora like Avatar has, and a modern camera has plenty of settings to help you shoot. Light balance controls, color correction, frame rate, even some basic stabilization in case you get a cheap stabilization rig. A film nowadays with poor light/color balance isn't a limitation of equipment like it was in the past. It is almost always an issue of not knowing how to use it. The theme can require things to be dark, but if people can't see what's going on in an action movie, then there's a problem. I don't personally see anything wrong with pointing out flaws, such as lighting or audio flaws, though I'm likely more forgiving than someone more versed on such technicalities. Also, I can't unsee this hand reaching out to steady the dino puppet in Jurassic Park, so now neither can you. It's right there, right as it comes in through the door. But there's a decent gray area around where a reasonable mistake is, well, reasonable. A billion-dollar production has no excuse to print an armor pattern on a shirt. Buy some cheap aluminum mail or something. A printed shirt is inexcusable with your budget. As it turns out, that was but one of a pattern of poor decisions and cheaping out, in the weirdest ways possible, in Rings of Power. So finally we come to the last part, patterns. When it's become a reoccurring event for many small and a few larger mistakes to get through, you start to question if there was quality control. The reason I brought up the clearly not researched sword forging from High Guardian Spice in my review was because it not only wasn't so much as Googled, but was part of a pattern of flaws big and small. It wasn't just the poor background layering that was clearly separated, not just the fucked up shadows and jarringly separate background and foreground. Even with all these constant fuck-ups, they had a full moving camera fight scene. Where was that effort before? There was a clear lapse in quality in there that added up quick. These aren't small bits of the storyboard being visible or short 1 to 2 frame animation layer fuck-ups. Many of these practically slapped me in the face with how obvious they were. Slime Boy's audio and his animation never seemed to line up right, and there was definitely some tweaking going on mid-show to make him sound better. You're an animation. A fun thing you can do is re-record your lines without the need to reshoot. If his audio needed fixing, go back and redo the earlier ones that got fucked up. All that plus the idiot plot that the whole thing ran on showed a clear lack of care and/or resources to make the show. I realized that a pattern isn't a hard line, and the level of story impact is not always clear. But there are definite impactful and inconsequential issues, with the line in between sometimes being case by case and worth discussing. Production flaws are fine to point out and can suggest that the maker didn't know what they were doing. Again, the amount that makes a media bad will change, and depends on the media in question. A video game must at least function. Meanwhile, a tattered book that was poorly bound could still contain a good story. The binding is not necessarily the important part when it comes to a book. The annoying thing I see floating around, though, is that reviewers are nitpicking. A nitpick is a cup moving between shots, a single crew member caught in the shot, a smaller otherwise inconsequential animation mistake, saying turn right but they do so from the audience perspective instead of their own. Most importantly, it is picking a small thing from an otherwise acceptable whole. If the issue is obvious, consequential to the plot, or another issue in a pile of issues, it's no longer a nitpick. I'm pointing out the flaws that have consequences to the story and display. Or I'm piece by piece highlighting that the whole rest of the thing is in fact made of nits. So let me know, was this a bit of a ramble? Was there something I didn't go over? Where do you stand on the levels of impact? Do you think that the gray area is smaller than I say it is? Do you stand that there is nothing small enough to be considered a nitpick? Let me know in the comments as you like, comment, share, subscribe, follow me on Twitter so you can ask what the holdup is delaying my videos. Or if you think that no criticisms are valid, then it is gonna be a hard sell, but have at trying. Though if you can't work out an argument for that, then feel free to also hit the comments and be entertainingly angry.